Well, good evening, everyone. Lovely to be with you tonight, as always. I thought what we could do first is just settle in a bit and first check in with the body. Make sure that it is as comfortable as it can be without trying to make it be something that it doesn't want to do. Just check in to see if there's any tension that could be let go of easily. Also, notice that the breath is happening. Just notice if there's any tension around it and if it can be relaxed. Allow the body to receive the air in the room. Welcome it. Expand to receive it. Right. Notice if there's any residual thoughts from the day that we can set aside for the next little bit. I'm sure they'll be there if they need to be there later on, so we can just gently ask to have them set aside. We'll take care of them later if we need to. So it's possible just to be here without any demands on this moment. Any need that our minds can come up with that it should be different than it is. You can allow it just to be as it is right now. It would only be our minds that would insist that somehow that's not enough. So as we just sit here, we can just sense into whatever sense of presence may be real for you in this moment. It might be the sense of feeling into the body, just whatever sensations may be there. Maybe just the sensation of moving with the breath. Maybe the auditory sensation of hearing the voice. Maybe just sensing into the spaciousness of the room, the space within the room. And as we let all of that be as it is, we can notice that there may be this sense of I am here, it is now, I exist. There's no liveness that I can sense here in this moment. We haven't added anything to this moment, we've just uncluttered it a bit. When we sense into just this simple sense of being here, in the present moment, without trying to be in the present moment. Just notice that it's always the present moment. We can't escape from it. So there's a sense of aliveness there. You can also notice that this moment, this present moment, isn't in itself demanding anything. It's not demanding anything be different. Our mind might come in and say, yeah, but it'd be nicer if something. But we can just see that the mind is just trying to come in and say, what about me? And we can let it do that. That's what it was trained to do. We can let it do that and not be bothered by it. Also, not try to push it away. Just if that's what the mind is doing, that's what the mind is doing, no problem. And we can see even if the mind is chatting away to itself, still there's a sense of presence here, sense of beingness, sense of aliveness. This is a very simple yet extraordinary sense of I exist in this moment. Without having to change anything, without having to understand anything. Without having to improve anything. Just resting in this simple sense of being present, aliveness, without trying to interpret what any of that means. Just, it's much, much more important just to stay with it, just the sense of it, just the felt sense of presence here in this moment. And we can notice that we didn't ask ourselves to imagine anything. You know, this sense of being isn't dependent on any philosophy. We didn't attain it. We miss it only because we fail to value it. Not that it's absent ever in any way, but in some sense, it's the easiest thing in the world to dismiss, only because it's not going anywhere. It doesn't require our permission to be. It's not disturbed when we ignore it. It is just what is present for everything. So we can also notice that it's not a high state, it's not an elevated, you could say spiritual state. It's just our natural state. Within that, it's not really even a state, but within that direct experience of the simple sense of presence, we can have a high state. We can have a contracted state. That sense of presence, beingness is still present for all of that. Might get pulled into the sort of gravitational field of that particular state, whether high or contracted. Nonetheless, it's still our essential awareness that's present for it all. Okay, everybody here? What we could talk about tonight is to really investigate closely how we experience the world. So we've all been trained, thoroughly trained, to believe in certain things about who I am and how the world works that we just take to be true at this point. Things like I was born, I have a lifespan of a limited number of years, and at some point I will die. There's also the belief that what I am is this body. There's also a belief that I am the thinker of my thoughts. There's also the belief that there's a world out there that existed before I was born, exists now, and will continue to exist after I die. There's an objective external world out there. And that what I do is, as a separate self, I go out into the world and do things out there, interact with physical objects and other beings out in the world. So I have this belief that there's an objective physical world outside of what I take myself to be, which is this body-mind organism. So that sort of describes our consensus reality, pretty much what everybody, nearly everybody believes. That's how things are. And to even question that sort of puts you in the lunatic fringe percentage of society, because everybody knows it's real. Everybody knows that's how it works. But consensus reality isn't really sufficient when we are looking for what could be called ultimate truth. What's true under all circumstances, at all times, for everyone. What's that? And that's a higher standard than just believing what we've been taught just because everybody else was taught that, our parents were taught that, and nobody really questions it. And we can get by as adults in this world, we can get by pretty well without ever questioning it. We can function as if all of that were true. The only problem is that it's not ultimately true. None of it. All of it is conjecture. That sounds like a radical statement that's either based on some obscure philosophy or some description of altered state or just plain lunacy. Who knows? But what I'd like to do tonight is just go step by step and take our time doing that to see how it is that we actually experience the world. Okay, so even though all of what I described as our consensus reality is conjecture. It's not actually true. Yet we can still function in that world as if it were true. I mean, we can still, find the door and walk through the door rather than walk into the wall. We can still know where to put the food when we're hungry. We can still have a reasonable certainty that the chair will support us when we sit in it. We can be happy with the birth of a baby. So we can function in the world um, pretty well without ever looking more deeply. But if we do look more deeply, there are implications to what we find. So the situation is a little analogous to physics. So you'll bear with me. I'll just talk briefly because this world as we see it outside functions more or less as Isaac Newton described it 400 years ago. You know, he came up with a set of mathematics about force and motion, and we can look around and say, yeah, that's pretty much how the world works. You know, so based on those mathematical physical principles, you know, we can predict movement of planets. We can, you know, plot the trajectory of cannonballs. We can, you know, sort of the basis for the industrial age. Okay, the only problem was that it's not ultimately true. Makes sense, but it's not ultimately the deepest level of truth. So in the last century, physicists have realized that there's a more fundamental way of looking at things that's called quantum mechanics. And the odd thing about quantum mechanics is that it's more true, but sounds ridiculous when you talk about it because it doesn't conform to our day-to-day experience. And the reason that it doesn't, and Newtonian physics did, is because what we see in our day-to-day world is of a particular scale that's relevant to us as humans. So, you know, things that are microscopic, you know, if we're not looking through a microscope, we don't actually see them. You know, you know, things that are existing at phenomenal speeds, light years away from us, we don't actually relate to either, except to look at the stars at night, unless we're an astronomer. But some things that require, you know, looking at really, really small things, subatomic things, or really, really big or extraordinarily fast-moving things, or things that require, you know, a huge degree of accuracy, like GPS satellites. The old physics don't work, you know. So there's something fundamentally more true that can be sort of ignored at our scale of existence, and everything works just fine. So in that sense, you know, walking about in what we perceive the world to be works. You know, that's why consensus reality of how everything works makes sense, and even to question it throws you into the lunatic fringe. Okay, but let's look at more closely about our actual experience of the world. So the only entity that we have that can experience the world is this body-mind, right? So, and it has a limited number of portals, like your computer only has a limited number of plugins at the back of the computer. And in the case of our body, we have the five physical senses, you know, seeing, taste, touch, etc. Okay. There's also some internal sensations happening, like thinking and feeling. And those could be, you know, further subdivided. I mean, thinking could be, you know, sliced and diced into, you know, memory and conceptualization and understanding, etc. And feelings could be divided and analyzed too. But for the purposes that we're talking about, we have these five external portals, which are the only portals that we have to receive information from the outside, so-called outside world, okay? So let's just take seeing, since it's our, you know, primary way of relating to the world. And when we go outside, it's very convincing, because when we look in this direction, we see this panorama. When we look over there, we see another panorama of objects. But we don't actually have a direct experience of anything out in that field beyond this body. So it feels like we do. We're able to interact with the world as if we do, but we don't actually ever have a direct interaction with anything beyond the physical limits of this organism. Okay, so let's just, for example, let's just take this sense of seeing. And we could say, well, you know, I see a sunflower, a yellow sunflower out in the field over there. But we don't actually, you know, there's nothing in our eyeballs that sort of ventures out and has a direct contact with some sunflower out in the world somewhere. Okay. What's actually happening, if we slow it all down, is that there is sunlight that we can't see shining on the sunflower, and some fraction of that sunlight is reflected that we receive in our eyes, and our eyes are able to recognize that particular fraction of the sunlight and as a yellow color, right? So, but it's worthy to note that the eye itself is totally passive in that regard. You know, it only receives what light is reflected and enters the eye. So the eye doesn't do anything beyond itself. It just receives what is being reflected out in the world by the sunlight. And one interesting question to ask ourselves is, you know, what color is the sunflower if on a pitch dark night? We can't see it, right? The reason we can't see it is there's no light being reflected from it. So what color is it? You know, so we can see really quickly that the color that we perceive in our body is a function of the sunlight, presence of sunflower, and a function of our eyes, right? Any one of those things are absent, we don't see anything. Sunlight, sunflower, eyeballs, any one is absent, we don't see anything. So that's the mechanism in the case of seeing, where the information enters our body. But it's really important to note that there's nothing that extends out past our body. It's entirely passive in that regard. The eyeballs are passive and receive information, but they don't sort of exit our head and go out searching out information. The other thing to notice is that the information coming into the eyeball is like raw data, right? The eye itself doesn't actually see the color yellow, right? That's not where it happens. The eyeball receives that particular spectrum of light and passes it on to the brain, you know, through the optic nerve, sends it on. It's just like, I don't know, you know, Amazon, you know, shipping station. It receives stuff and sends it on, doesn't pay much attention to it. But it sees whatever is in its field. It's totally receptive in that regard. And when we really look at our other sense organs, our hearing, you know, our smell, our taste, our touch, they're doing actually the same thing. They're receiving information and passing it on. So where that information is actually or digested and analyzed and conceptualized, based on our conditioning, it's where we sort of reconstitute an image of a sunflower in our brain, right? But what's being transmitted from the eye back to the brain is just an electrical impulse. It's not an image. The image is the ability of the brain to compare that electrical impulse, electrochemical impulse maybe. Okay, so the brain is where that information is put together and that image is reconstituted. Reconstituted like, frozen orange juice, put back together again. So we see it, we interpret it as being outside of ourselves, but that whole receiving, data collection and reassembly all happens within either on the surface of us or within us, all of it. We never actually experience anything directly outside of this organism. Never. We've never actually encountered the world directly. All we've ever seen of the world are these perceptions that have been passed on and interpreted by the mind. At this point, we can, decisions can be made, actions can be taken, etc. But what is, there's another element here that happens, and that is the awareness that notices whatever information is being consciously processed in the brain. Okay, so that awareness is the essential ingredient. So this information that happens wholly within the body or on the surface of the body and transmitted to the brain, analyzed, sort of filtered through all our past conditioning about, we've seen a sunflower before, we know what it is, we know what this stimulus that we name yellow, we know what that looks like. So that there's a knowing on that level of what we are, what information is being received by the body. But in order for that to be perceived in a sense that we know what we're looking at, that is something other than the mind. That is this sense of awareness of whatever's happening at the level of mind, level of brain. I'm using mind and as brains functioning in that sense. Okay, so without that awareness being present, we would have there'd be nothing to recognize whatever image might have been present there. So in that sense, it's an essential, fundamental part of the seeing. The assumption that most people make is that awareness is just another function of the brain somehow. But it's much more fundamental than that. There's no evidence, there's no proof at all that the awareness is a function of our brain. That fact likes to be ignored by most scientists. But there's an undeniable sense of awareness, like just in this moment, right? Just your capacity to hear this voice is proof of awareness. If there was no awareness, you would have no knowledge of, well, no knowledge of anything, no knowledge of the world, no knowledge of yourself. By knowledge, I don't mean information. I just mean there's no knowing. There's no sense of, yes, that's true. There's sight and there's seeing happening. There's an image in my mind. You know, I'm not talking about knowing information. I'm just talking about being present for whatever images or activities or thoughts or feelings are appearing in the body. There's something that's aware that is there to recognize it. Okay, so in that sense, the awareness is essential to, in the case that we're looking at, just this process of seeing. There's this somewhat mechanical, electrical, cellular process that ends up with that image formed in our mind, but there's something that we can call awareness or consciousness that is present to notice that function in the mind. So you could say that there is an interface between awareness and the content of awareness. So the content of awareness happens as we've traced it back wholly within this body-mind structure. We've traced it back, through our sense organs, how that information is transmitted basically as raw data back to the brain, which compiles it. But then there's this interface, this point of connection between awareness and perceptions, awareness and thoughts, awareness and anything that appears within that field of awareness. But all of it happens within this physical organism. The awareness isn't limited to this physical organism, but the point that it is present for that perceptual input happens within this organism. So if we see that clearly enough, we can say without embarrassment that the entire world, our experience of the entire world, happens within this field of awareness. And that point of interaction, that point of connection between awareness and objects that appear within awareness happens wholly within this body-mind. So that's the basis for saying that the most we can say about an objective external world is that we have perceptions that seem to function, that we can intuit a world out there. We can function as if there is an objective external world out there. We can walk around without bumping into things. But what is within our ability to know firsthand, all we can know is what appears within this, on the screen of awareness, which is perceptions within this body-mind. That's all we've got. But that's pretty good, nonetheless. Right? So there's been a lot of different analogies that are used in spirituality that describe, try to attempt to describe this activity. One common one is, it's similar, this awareness is similar to a movie screen. Before the movie's played, it's just plain blank screen. And when the movie's played, it just basically intercepts the light from the movie projector. And so, if you're watching the movie, you watch the flickering lights on the screen, you forget all about the movie screen. It's actually essential for the appearance of the movie. And you know, the movie screen actually is unaffected by, you know, whether it's a love story or a chainsaw massacre, you know, it's still there, it's still present for whatever arises, and it's untainted by, you know, whatever appears on that screen. So in that way, that example is sometimes used as an analogy for this awareness that is present for whatever arises, whatever perceptions, thoughts, feelings appear within that field of awareness. And yet that field of awareness is undiminished by or unenhanced by whatever appears within that field. Okay, another example is sometimes here the mind as a mirror, right? Because you know, we go into the bathroom, we look in the mirror is totally receptive. You know, it's not judging anything that's seen, perfectly willing to receive whatever image appears before it. You know, one image disappears and another one appears in front of it. It doesn't hold, you know, there's no residual hangover from the prior image there. It's always fresh, always present, always immediately present, always willing to receive everything. In that way, again, analogous to our own awareness. Okay, one final analogy is sometimes awareness is described as spacious. Right? It doesn't. It's not talking about space as we think of it. You know, like it's this big and etc. But it's more this, as space is able to receive, accept whatever's placed in it. Let's say we have a room, it's not all that big, but we put an elephant in the room. Space is not diminished. You know, it's still every bit as much space as there was before. Space doesn't object to the presence of things put in it, right? Very much like the awareness that we all are, doesn't actually object to anything that arises within it. It's still present, it's still there. Our mind may object to it, often does, right? I don't like that thought, you know, I don't like this experience, I'm bored, I'm tired of it. Whatever our objection is, or we might love the experience, hope it goes on for longer. The awareness isn't trying to manage any of that. It's not trying to improve it, doesn't have an agenda. It's just consciously present, lovingly present, because it's non-judgmental, and it's just there, right? So we need to be cautious, because sometimes in spirituality we hear like, well, the world is an illusion. You know, the world doesn't really exist. So that's, we have to be careful about what we're saying here. And to say that our entire experience of the world happens within awareness at this interface between our perceptions and that which is beyond the domain of time and space, namely awareness, at that intersection is where we experience the entire world. So what we experience and intuit as being a real objective outside world full of things isn't. What it is and what we can perceive are these perceptions, sort of the flickering on the screen, much like the movie theater. But that's not to say that the world doesn't exist, right? We don't actually we aren't able to say whether it does or it doesn't. The only proof we have is that what this awareness is present for the appearance of these perceptions within this organism. That's what we do know. It would be conjecture to say that the world exists as an objective, external, ever-present thing, full of matter, etc. But it would also be a mistake to say that it doesn't exist. Because it does. It exists in our awareness. It exists as the appearance as we can notice that. So it's interesting to note one of the, the person who's considered like the father of quantum mechanics was a guy back in the 1920s. I mean, it's 100 years ago now, a man called Max Planck. It said that consciousness is fundamental. You know, matter is secondary. Interesting statement from a physicist, right? But that is our actual direct experience. Without awareness, nothing exists. With awareness, we have the experience of this ever-changing content that arises within that awareness and quickly falls away too. Okay. Well, what we do as humans is identify with the content, right? All our perceptions, experiences, thoughts, feelings. We identify ourselves as all of that and forget all about the awareness part of it. Because the awareness is easy to disregard, right? And by doing that over many, many years is just the sort of the allure of the appearance of all of these exciting things in the field of consciousness. Our awareness just sort of gets sucked into that, gets lost into this illusion of an outside world. And we forget all about the awareness and just imagine that the world consists of things and people and activity and energy and fun and hard things and all of that. You know, we get totally absorbed in that. So the process of spirituality is really to be able to tease out that sense of awareness so that we see it, we not only see it, we recognize it as essentially what we are. So that's really step one. There are only two steps. Step one is that we sort of, where awareness recognizes itself as being fundamental to this entire experience, that everything that arises within it is of a sort of a different character than the awareness itself. Different character, I mean that everything else can be looked at, images, perceptions, thoughts, feelings, all can be noticed, but what's noticing them is this awareness. So that's, and there's no way to step back behind awareness and look at it. So in that sense, awareness is not a thing. It's not nothing either, right? It's no thing, but it's not nothing. Okay, it's very real. It's what we essentially are, but it's not something that we can put in a box, conceptualize, look at, define, but we can be it. We are it. We are it already. But step one is to sort of recognize the unique nature of awareness, the mysterious capacity to be aware, the extraordinary capacity to be aware. So that's step one, awareness recognizing itself. Step two is when awareness is willing to come back into form, the form that it got lost in before. Awareness recognizes itself. And then it might take a little while, but at some point, awareness becomes curious about form again, but re-enters it knowingly. That's the difference. Okay. So there's an interesting Hindu sutra, quite old. It only has 3 short lines. The first 2 lines are, the world is illusion, Brahman alone is real. Brahman just means the ultimate. You could substitute the word God or whatever you like there. The world is illusion, Brahman alone is real. So I mentioned that it has 3 lines. That's the first 2. So if we just take those first 2, that's a dualistic statement, right? It's basically disregarding the appearance of the world, disregarding our perceptions, thoughts, and whatever. Only the ultimate is real. So it's a very dualistic statement. This is real, this is not. Everything's cut in 2. What's interesting about it is the 3rd line. Okay, the first 2 lines again are, the world is illusion, Brahman alone is real. 3rd line is, the world is Brahman. So that's coming back home. That's coming where this recognition of awareness is cautiously willing to come back into sort of the messy world of form, the limited world of form. And come back into that form to be willing to live this life with these imperfections, but live it knowing what we truly are. So this is, a lot of spiritual people don't like that second part, you know, where we're coming back into form. They like to be just transcend and forget about the world. But that is actually what's actually a nihilistic conclusion, and it's not true. It's not ultimately true. It's nice, you know, when it's first encountered, you know, to be free of the world, to realize that I'm not what I thought I was. I'm not limited in the way I thought I was. That's beautiful, undeniably. But what is the completion of that realization is to be free enough to come back into this form and to live in this world and to experience what that is. Right? So it can be a little tricky. It's sort of like you know, going to the movie theater and watching a really entertaining movie and being absorbed in the movie, and all the while knowing that the movie is being played on a blank screen. Okay, it's hard to enjoy the movie and, you know, retain that recognition. But that's well, it doesn't require that kind of mental effort, but it's similar in some ways. It's a little bit like a lucid dream. Well, you know, we've re-entered the dream, but we know that we're dreaming, which changes things immensely. We're still watching the movie. We're even a character in the movie and watching it at the same time. So it's actually quite entertaining in that sense. We get to participate in life, and yet we know ultimately um, what we are is this awareness that is experiencing life wholly within the perceptions that are occurring within what we are. So the entire experience of the world is occurring within the awareness that we are. And then at the end of the movie, we get to go home.